So my name is Alexandra Billis. I'm the governance advisor that is supporting the meeting today. Thank you so much for coming in to speak to your submissions, and thank you to our panel who are here. The first order of business is to ask the hearings panel to elect a chair. Have you done so?
Yes. Well, I nominate Councillor Smith, our Deputy Mayor.
Perfect.
I second that nomination.
Lovely, that's great.
Thank you.
So it has been moved.
Thank you. Welcome everyone today. The purpose of today's meeting is a hearing of submissions on the proposed draft alcohol restrictions in public places bylaw. And thank you for those who have made submissions, who are attending to speak to those submissions today, and we'll work through those in due course. Firstly, there's no apologies, so we can move on from that. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest on today's agenda? No. Thank you. Confirmation of the agenda today.
I'll move that it be confirmed.
Yep.
I'll second. Yeah.
Thank you. And all in favour? Yes. So put on the agenda. We personally will invite the council staff to the table who prepared the report.
I will take the report as read, just pointing out a couple of things. I think this is the first bylaw hearings of this triennium, just to make it really important today. And as Councillor Smith has pointed out, what the objectives here are today, you'll be aware from the report that there's a few moving parts in this bylaw, probably due to the legal requirements involved in imposing alcohol restriction areas. And the second aspect is that QLDC bylaw in this regard has different ban areas and tops. So I don't have anything else to point out, except for really interested to hear from the speakers, and that the next step in this process is that it's intended that a draft bylaw will go to Council's 10th of August meeting for its deliberation and adoption. So, you know, this panel will form recommendations, and then the Council may deliberate and adopt it in August.
Thank you. So, my questions from the panel, we will get an opportunity obviously to speak to the officers after we've heard the submissions and deliberate with them. But are there any questions ahead of the submissions today that you want clarification on?
No, not for me. Not for me.
I have one question. It relates to page 32 and 33 of the agenda. It wasn't clear to me from the changes to the bylaw what the proposed map for Wanaka actually looks like now, because I can't see an amendment, the new map version on either of those pages.
Okay.
Because of the way the formatting has worked with the deleted.
Through and the
It's page.
So it's at page 33 is what the current proposed map is in the draft bylaw, and then it is for the panel to.
That's the proposed one, but in the description it talks about removing the golf course and stuff like that. So the map doesn't match the description.
Oh, sorry, that is for the panel to deliberate today. It hasn't been proposed as a recommendation. It will depend on the evidence and information presented.
So there is
you're correct. There was some ambiguity there. That was not a direct officer recommendation. It was just for the purpose of clearly outlining the things for the panel to consider.
Okay, so we can't treat that draft bylaw and the deletions and remove as the proposal before us today incomplete. So
if the panel decides to alter that, then we would go back to the GIS team and bring a new map back to councillors.
Okay. Is there a map of what's proposed, or is it just described?
So the map at page 33 is what is being proposed today.
Okay, right. but it's not how I read it, but we'll cover that off.
Yeah, no apologies for any confusion, and then take that on board. The purpose was merely to make sure it was really open what is out there for consideration.
All right, well, thank you for that. No further questions. No. All right, with that, we'll proceed to the hearing of submissions. Thank you. So firstly, I'd like to invite Shannon Thompson to the table from Red Frogs. Well, thanks kindly, and thanks for coming along today. We'll keep it reasonably informal, but we've got roughly 5 minutes, and we do want, it's best to leave a bit of time for questions, so we'll literally in your hands.
Yeah. So hi, my name is Shannon Thompson. I'm from Ray, and we lead Red Frogs. So for the past 7 years, we've been providing alcohol harm prevention in the region and throughout the country, but particularly here in Queenstown Lakes. During that New Year's period, so 3 nights, the 29th, 30th, 31st in Queenstown and Wanaka, we work alongside police, ambulance, the council, just to help make sure that people are safe while they're out having fun. We run a safe zone in the centre of both towns, where we provide free food and water. We have medics there who will assess people, make sure that they're okay, and then our volunteers, we provide the care and comfort. So we'll hold their hair back while they're vomiting, we'll sit with them while they're crying, or wait with them and watch over them while they sleep it off. And that frees up the ambulance teams and staff from having to provide that side of things. We're a referral agency. So we don't, we refer on. So we refer on to medics, we refer on to police, we refer on to security. We also have teams roaming through the event precincts in both towns. So they'll have a water pack, they'll have some Red Frog lollies, and they'll just be eyes and ears. And so they're looking along the waterfront, making sure there's no one passed out in the water, that there's that people are safe, that no one is passed out in dark corners or anything like that. So that's just a bit of a context of what we do. And so in the past, I've got some numbers here because I know that numbers are important. In the past 7 years, we have interacted in Queenstown with 24,803 people. Now those interactions are things like handing out pancakes, giving them water, having a chat with them, right through to providing that more intense care, sitting with them while they pass out, referring on to ambulance and police. In Wanaka, in the same period, we have interacted with 38,470 people doing the same thing. Those are conservative stats because we can't always keep track when we get really, really busy. But we interact with a large number of people. So we see people of all ages in all kinds of states, particularly younger ones. And we deal with a lot of intoxication, drug intoxication, and the effects from that. We keep stats on our incidents. So those are things where people are referred on to other services, such as police, ambulance, that have involved a 111 call or security. And last year alone, over both Queenstown and Wanaka, there was 47 people. So 47 people required either an ambulance or police assistance or a 111 call over those 3 nights, just to make sure that they were safe. Last year, also across both zones, we provided.
That included medical support.
That included medical support.
So would have resulted in further referral without medics and stuff.
Yes. And then we've also provided what we call active care. So active care is when someone is directly cared for or assisted by a Red Frogs team, medics, security. And security. And for last year, there was 177 people across both zones over those 3 nights. So in that short amount of time we're encountering, and those are just the ones that we know of that need our help. We encounter a whole lot more. We deal with things from, as I mentioned before, drug intoxication, alcohol intoxication, through to alleged sexual assault. We have people come to us who've been involved in fights because someone's tried to king hit or just there's the regression on the street. So we see a whole wide range of things, and we see the benefit of having these alcohol bans and these bylaws in place. So we would really urge you guys to consider keeping them in place and allowing the council and police to have the options to be able to put them in place for specific events. I know that you've looked at the likes of Crate Day, but if there's other events that are coming up and you've got concerns, I think that the council needs to be able to have the ability or the flexibility to be able to go, actually, we've got concerns about this, we've had concerns about this event in the past, let's mitigate some harm by putting in a temporary alcohol ban. And I'd hate to see the existing ones removed as well. Yeah.
Thank you. And so thank you for your work. We're well aware of the work that you guys do, and it's well appreciated. I'll just throw to the panel for questions and probably specifically related to the provisions of the bylaw and what input they want to have.
Yeah, just through the chair, thank you. Once again, just backing up the Deputy Mayor's comment around the work you do, greatly appreciate it. Do you think the bylaw serves your organisation well as it sits at the moment? I know that there is ongoing work that we're involved with as councillors around alcohol, New Year, the Christmas period, the busy times of the year.
Yeah.
But do you feel that the bylaw as it stands at the moment is a good tool?
Absolutely. I think if it was to be removed, the amount of harm that there is would increase remarkably. It is very, young people are going to do what they're going to do, but I think if you gave them what they would see as permission to be drinking out there on the streets during those times, then they would take massive liberties with it, and I think we'd just see so much more harm than what we currently see. Yeah.
Right, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So the 3 nights, Christmas, New Year's.
So it's the 29th, 30th and 31st of December.
Okay. So nothing at Christmas.
No, we don't do anything with Christmas.
Right.
Yeah, everyone's volunteers. We bring in a team of up to around 65 volunteers from throughout the country.
Okay. So and the people then that you are helping are obviously drinking elsewhere, then arriving.
Yeah, a lot of them are, particularly in Wanaka, they're having parties and barbecues at batches and stuff like that. You can see them all come into town across different places, but they are also bringing alcohol in with them. I think it was the year before last, the kids on their restricted licenses were driving their cars into the car parks and then just parking them there before 10 o'clock, and they were all loaded up with alcohol. And yes, it was the year that they didn't have the event. There was no New Year's event on that year.
I think the ability to have alcohol on the lakefront, particularly for the age group that we work with, sort of over that period, probably 15 to 25 is the majority. If there was the ability to have alcohol present on the lakefront throughout the night, it would increase risk factors overall for sure, and push it out further into the night. So one of the things that we do find is as the night goes on, in terms of alcohol intoxication, there's actually less alcohol intoxication as the night goes on because they don't have the access to it on the lakefront. Yeah.
Just one more through the chair, thank you. Do you see a difference between what happens in the Upper Cleethorpes as opposed to what happens here in the Wakatipu Basin?
Yes, yeah, there is a difference. I think part of that is because the mix of patrons is different. Here you've got a lot more tourists, a lot more families, and it seems to be the older youth are the ones that come here. So the year 13 students, they all go to Queenstown. The year 12 students are under 10 to go to Wanaka. That's what we found last year. We were busier in Queenstown. It's an anomaly across all of the years.
That was the first time in the 7 years been involved.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Just one more.
One quick one. Yeah, we're going to
So your efforts are based on those, focus on those 3 nights. Do you have any other patrols at all on any other nights through that ban period, like Christmas and New Year?
No, we actually come in specifically for the 3 nights. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I've got just a quick one. So we've got well documented cases of the Christmas Day issues on Queenstown Beach. What's your perception of what happens in Wanaka outside of the New Year's period, and do you think having the ban in place from Christmas Eve right through New Year's is beneficial?
I think it definitely is. We lived in Cromwell for a number of years, and so would, you know, pop over to Wanaka and stuff. And so you do see and you do hear the stories of the harm that is still happening. People are still coming into the area. And I think it's important to know it's not just local people. So it's easy to go, oh, it's just the locals, but no, it's people coming in, and in that holiday period, there is that potential for the same thing. They're coming in. We're doing a response from the 29th and 30th, not because there is an event on, like there was on New Year's, but because this is a response to something that's organically happening. So there is the potential for that to start coming earlier and doing it on the 22nd.
And there is actually a pretty significant shoulder period. So for example, the first year that we did, that we had a response in Queenstown and Wanaka, literally the day before our first response, which was the 29th, was the Ruby Island incident.
Yeah.
So there is actually the reason that we focus on 29th, 30th and 31st is that's what we're able to do with the resource that we have and that people resource that we have.
Thank you. We will have to wrap it up. So we've got lots of submitted, but thanks for your input and we do appreciate that.
No worries, thank you.
Thank you. Darrell Jenkins.
Hi.
Hi, how are you? Well, same deal. We'll try and keep it to around 5 minutes, but leave some time for questions if we can.
Yeah, sweet as. Okay. I'll do an intro for the purposes of everybody in the room. I'm from Hospitality New Zealand. We are a member-led non-for-profit organisation representing approximately 3,000 businesses, including cafes, restaurants, bars, nightclubs, commercial accommodation, country hotels and off licences around the country. We've got 121 years of history of advocating on behalf of hospitality and tourism sector. And we are led by our Chief Executive, Julie White. We have 18 local branches covering the entire country, representing at a local level all those member businesses which are located within the region. Our Central Otago branch comprises of 175 members, 134 of which operate within the QLDC. There are a mixture of food and beverage and accommodation providers, 95 of which hold an alcohol licence in our QLDC region. Okay, so we welcome the opportunity to comment on the alcohol restrictions in public places bylaw. We Hospitality New Zealand members agree that there is currently inconsistency with the start and end time of the alcohol bans and agree to aligning these times. Hospitality New Zealand believe that the suggested and somewhat current bylaw start time of 8 PM could be too late, especially in summer, with the example of shutting the gate after the horse has bolted. Hospitality New Zealand's preference would include a 24-hour alcohol ban in hospitality precincts that direct public consumption of liquor to other public areas. To clarify, hospitality precincts are areas with food and beverage outlets, for example, and not limited to Queenstown's Mall and Beach Street, and Wanaka's Ardmore and Helwick Street, as an example. Currently, public seating is available in these precincts and alcohol can be consumed on them just meters away from hospitality venue entrances and outdoor dining areas. This can lead to issues of investigating where a person's alcohol was from to prove a nearby licensee wasn't breaching their on licence. If a 24-hour alcohol ban isn't an option, we would suggest a blanket 6 PM start time for the alcohol ban instead of suggested 8 PM. The bylaw certainly has the right intentions by encouraging patrons into unlicensed premises that are supervised and have host responsibility policies to abide by. We firmly believe 6 PM would be a preventative start time. People can get dinner and slow their consumption down, which would lead to a longer and more enjoyable evening, creating extra spend in the district also. Regarding your bylaw proposal with certain specified periods over Christmas and New Year, we do support the 24-hour ban for this time period. This ban would be easier to understand and visitors and residents would expect it if we also had a 24-hour ban in the hospitality precinct. And then regarding the Crate Day specified period, we also appreciate the addition of National Crate Day into the bylaw and again raise the point that a 24-hour ban would make this easier to enforce and understand in hospitality precincts as well. Hospitality New Zealand firmly believes that well-run, unlicensed premises are the safest place for people to enjoy alcohol responsibly. Hospitality staff carry extended responsibility given that they monitor point of consumption, not just point of sale. Staff are trained to minimise harm, manage the environment, deal with any problems and keep their patrons safe. Members have raised that while the liquor ban may be in place, it's only is as effective as its enforcement. Any changes to the liquor ban need to be appropriately enforced, and we recommend council work more closely with police to ensure this is happening. Thank you very much for the opportunity to submit.
Thank you. So questions from the panel?
Not
Kevin?
No. Sorry. No, thanks.
Not from me. Thank you though.
No worries.
Yeah, thank you. I know that's
Easy
very
as.
clear and thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Very good. All right, we have next we have Lieutenant Andrew Wilson, Salvation Army. Thank you. Welcome to the table.
Morning.
Morning.
So those who don't know me, my name is Lieutenant Andrew Wilson. Along with my wife, we're the officers and directors of Community Ministries for the Salvation Army, both here and in Wanaka. So a bit of context in terms of our skin in the game. Up until June 2020, we ran our worshipping community out of Camp Street, 29 Camp Street, and so it wasn't a too uncommon experience walking to our church building, seeing either rubbish bins overflowing with empty bottles or boxes of alcohol or bloodied pavement from the night previous to this events. So in that spirit, anything that the council can do to encourage the safe and responsible drinking and consumption of alcohol, the council should adopt those things. On our submission, I just particularly want to highlight the recommendation around the removal or the retaining of alcohol bans around Frankton, Arrowtown and Lake Hawea, noting the need for evidence to consider the use of an alcohol ban under the Local Government Act. Particularly wanting the council to take into consideration what COVID has done in terms of the ability to gather in public places and the standing population of Queenstown and Wanaka, and the effect that has had on the ability to effectively gather the appropriate evidence to maintain an alcohol ban, and whether or not there's grace within the law to use the evidence that was provided in the first instance of this bylaw to maintain those spaces, noting within the submission that particularly in the case of the Winter Festival, how COVID has reduced Winter Festival's impact for the local policing because explicitly of COVID-19 and the need then for whether or not that will continue for the next period of review for this bylaw, and whether or not there's space to maintain the restrictions for Winter Festival. That was a lot of babble, but hopefully that came through enough. Yeah, that'll be.
Thank you. Just one question. I mean, Winter Festival isn't really a thing this year apart from fireworks. So I suppose, you know, it's hard to manage something around an event that isn't current. Any thoughts on that?
I think particularly in terms of recommendations from police and others, in terms of the 24-hour ban, I think that helps in terms of our local law enforcement to have a blanket rule that any event like Winter Festival that may ebb and flow, we've seen Luma and the and how the event organisers behind that have been very keen to grow that back to pre-COVID levels, and whether or not Winter Festival will go the same way. I mean, I personally would hope that is the case, but whether or not there's the provision in council and law enforcement to ensure it's a safe space for not only consumers of alcohol, but others wanting to enjoy that time.
Thank you. Any questions from?
You just for the chair, just got one question. Good to see you again, Andrew. Thanks for the work that you do. Through your eyes from the Salvation Army, or from a Salvation Army perspective, how do you think Queenstown, and not too sure what sort of, how many eyes you've got over Wanaka and the Upper Tweether, but how do you think Queenstown functions around alcohol and what this place is known for?
So we work closely with a number of individuals who have alcohol or other drug addictions. We support them both here locally in terms of just being that safe space for them at our Gorge Road site, or we can refer them on to our residential program in Dunedin. We see certainly a lot more of that in Queenstown than Wanaka, largely just because of our own resourcing. We have seen how business owners within the hospitality sector have been desiring a need to partner with us or work with us in terms of alcohol harm reduction. And so I see any means of encouraging those who desire to drink onto licensed premises where there are trained individuals to identify harmful drinking behaviour to do so. I believe drinking in public space, particularly if we're looking at reducing the alcohol ban in other public spaces outside of Queenstown, presents a too high probability of moving the problem elsewhere, so addressing it as a blanket.
Just one question, through the chair. You mentioned in your time at Kent Street, the mess and rubbish left outside or in the vicinity was quite noticeable. Was there a noticeable reduction in that during times that there was an alcohol ban?
So my time here in Queenstown started in 2019. So from my understanding of the reading of the current bylaw, all that time sits under this period. And so from my recollection, the times which we did notice it, some were over the holiday season, the summer holiday season, but I do recall one other time during the winter period, whether it was winter festival or just another week, and I can't recall precisely.
Thanks. Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Next we have Jamie Seymour from the Cancer Society of Otago Southland. Welcome.
I'm Jamie Seymour. Thank you for having me today. I work in cancer prevention for the Cancer Society of Otago and Southland. And as I stated in my submission, the Cancer Society's interest in this bylaw stems from the burden of alcohol-related cancers in our region. We acknowledge that there are many social issues related to alcohol consumption, many of which have already been discussed here today. But our priority concern is the link between alcohol and cancer. It's estimated that 7% of the total cancer burden in New Zealand is attributable to alcohol use. Alcohol is a group 1 carcinogen, like tobacco. It increases the risk of at least 7 types of cancer, including the mouth, pharynx or throat, the larynx or voice box, esophagus, bowel, liver, and breast in women. Drinking any amount of alcohol, even at low levels, can cause cancer. The level of cancer risk increases with the level of alcohol consumption, with the heaviest drinkers most at risk. In our region, this is particularly concerning because of the culture of youth drinking. Young adults aged 18 to 24 years remain the most hazardous alcohol consumers in New Zealand. But despite alcohol being a class 1 carcinogen, it is cheap, easily available, and excessively promoted in Aotearoa. It's our job at the Cancer Society to raise awareness that drinking alcohol, even moderately, raises the risk of developing cancer. It's your job at council to adopt greater alcohol regulation, such as limiting the public areas where alcohol can be openly consumed. This is key to protecting our communities on many levels, including from alcohol-related cancer, just like tobacco regulation. Alcohol regulation via this bylaw will protect our communities by helping shape the environment to be less alcohologenic, or that of a drinking culture, and help to denormalize alcohol consumption. There's strong evidence that the less available alcohol is in our communities, the more likely consumption will decrease. The less visible the act of drinking alcohol becomes, the less likely it is seen as a normal or routine social activity. That is why extending the ban to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, will in the long term benefit our communities and visitors to our district. It will also allow the police to better avert potential trouble that may arise from drinking in public places at any time of day. The rule that no drinking at any time is allowed in these areas is much clearer and succinct for the public to understand and abide by. Not removing the ban for the areas in Frankton, Arrowtown, and Lake Kauai, or the Queenstown Winter Festival, or any potential successor events, whatever those may be. It's also crucial to protecting our communities from alcohol harm and related cancers. It's important to note that reducing the places where alcohol is consumed is only one means that should be part of a wider harm reduction strategy for our district. That could include measures such as local alcohol policy, reducing availability through restricting alcohol outlet density and trading hours, restricting forms of marketing, promotion, and sponsorship. Individuals will always assess the risk that they are prepared to take when it comes to drinking alcohol. But as a council, the bylaw is a simple and responsible council solution towards better community health. No reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou.
Thank you. Invite any questions from the panel?
Nothing from me.
No, nothing from me, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you kindly for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Dr. Butchard and Dr. McLaughlin from Te Whatuora, sorry.
Thank you. Call Michael Butchard. I'm one of the medical officers of health for the Southern region. My employer is the National Public Health Service Southern. That's part of Te Whatuora, which is the service delivery arm of the health system in New Zealand. I do work out of Dunedin, and I've talked with colleagues who work locally, and I've also talked with my ED colleagues recently. So as a medical officer of health, our interest in this area is primarily with the reduction of alcohol-related harm. You're probably aware that under the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act, there's a tripartite relationship between council, inspectors, police, and the medical officer of health to try and reduce alcohol-related harm. I want to support what my colleague from the Cancer Society has just mentioned, the harm from the chronic exposure to alcohol, cancer causing up to 7% of deaths, cancer deaths. That's perhaps not well understood by the public, and hopefully that becomes more well understood over the coming years. As well as that chronic harm of cancer, there's also the acute harm, which is more what people are familiar with. And I've recently discussed that harm with our ED doctors and the effect that it has there. So our submission, what underpins it is the concept or premise that supervised drinking is safer than unsupervised drinking. So that's why we're in favour of alcohol-free zones. We're not in favour of people drinking unsupervised in local premises and pubs and the like. Those operators have obligations and responsibilities to look after their patrons, and we believe that that keeps people safer. So we would prefer when people drink, if they drink, that they're drinking in a supervised premise. So yesterday I met with ED staff, including the doctor and nurse, to get a sense of the impact that local drinking in the region is having on their services. What they said is that it only takes one drunk patient to absorb all of the resource overnight in ED. It's a very small staff overnight. There'll just be one doctor on. Very hard to handle an intoxicated patient. So that pulls resources away from the other people that are sitting in ED, such as, and they mentioned, young children or elderly and palliative care. They mentioned recent examples. While I'm not saying I can pin these examples to where people drink, because that's not the sort of information that ED collects. Reason being that it doesn't make a difference to the treatment of where someone drank, so they don't collect that information. It will be a burden on them. But recently, they've seen an increase in assaults, alcohol-related assaults. Recently, they shared a story of someone who was king hit, fractured skull, permanent brain damage. Also, they've had to employ a security guard Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night. That pulls resources out of health resources into security. And that's primarily because of drunk patients. So I guess the question is for councillors, how can we use the Local Government Act to help in this space? And I am conscious of how that act is written and that it requires evidence, local evidence of crime and disorder. So there's 2 points that I want to make there. One is that I think that the tripartite group, council, police, health, I think we can come together and do a better job of thinking about how we can collect evidence. Sometimes there's a lack of evidence in the council documents that have been prepared for this. That's one of the themes that comes through. I think the council has responsibility, given it's the council's bylaw, to think about how we can fill that gap. And health is here to help, and police is here to help. So I think while I don't have the answer yet today on what's the best way to collect that evidence, let's come together and talk through how we can do that. And we've made that point in the 2018 submission as well, filling that gap. The other point that I want to make, and apologies if I steal the thunder of my colleague from police, Simon, but I'm sure that Simon can reiterate this point as well. My reading of the law, and this is in relation to our proposal, that we would prefer that these alcohol-free zones are 24 hours a day. I don't think that what we need is evidence of harm, of crime and disorder in all of those 24 hours. I think what we need is to think about when was the alcohol consumed that caused the crime and disorder. If someone starts their drinking during the day and drinks 12 beers and then happens to cause a crime or is disorderly at 8 p.m, well, is the 8 p.m. ban going to help, or was it the beers that they consumed during the day? So I think that within the writing of the Act as it is, I think there is a legitimate argument that we do have the evidence to put over a 24-hour ban. If we think of it in that way, when was the alcohol consumed? So, in conclusion, I'm here because I'm interested in minimising alcohol harm. I realise that the word harm doesn't even appear in the Local Government Act, but we have to use that as one of the tools. There's no silver bullet to reducing alcohol harm. It's made up of many planks, and we have to see how we can use the Local Government Act as one of those planks, or at least a tool to hammer in one of those planks. I'm looking at the purpose of the Local Government Act, and it mentions enhancing democracy. That's one of the main reasons why I think that we shouldn't have a 10-year review. I think we should have a 5-year review. I know it's within the powers of the council to have a review earlier than that, but let's build it in 5 years. Things move fast in the cancer space and in the knowledge space there, and also the alcohol space. For example, Canada's rewritten their guidelines on drinking alcohol. They've reduced the safe limit to 2 standard drinks a week. Anything more than that, you're increasing your risk measurably of cancer. So I think in 10 years' time, the landscape's going to be very different. So let's build in the 5-year review. We encourage councils to use the alcohol-free zones, and I've read in the documents how the council was in favour of that in 2018. And I hope that there aren't any barriers to using that language, that positive language. We strongly recommend that 24 hours rather than the 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. because it's when that drink is being consumed that's the problem. And we recommend that collective approach between council, police and health, thinking about how we can collect the right sort of evidence, so next time that we review, we don't have those gaps, and we can speak with more knowledge. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. I'll invite some questions from the panel.
Yeah, just through the chair. You mentioned about council, police and health coming together, and you mentioned about that being a part of your submission in 2018. Has much transpired in that space between 2018 and now, 2023? Is it still an area you want to, I mean, when did the last time council, police, health get together?
So we all, as part of that tri-agency group, we meet regularly. I believe we have monthly meetings anyway at the level of the inspector, police and our staff. I don't think that, so those meetings are more under different legislation. They're under the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act. And we do have to, in section 295 of that act, we do have to come together to work on alcohol harm reduction strategies. And those, hopefully in the future, will include things like a local alcohol ban, for example. I think in relation to these alcohol-free zones, I'd be very keen for us to specifically think about the collection of evidence. The difficulty is that it would require resource. It probably would require certainly a plan going out probably and collecting evidence like a physical person noting what's going on at regular intervals, regular days, and given the hours, it wouldn't be a particularly exciting job for people to do because it might be going out 10 p.m. midnight, who knows. But anyway, that's just my hypothesising of how we can do that. I think that we need to sit down and plan that properly.
Thank you.
You get it?
No, nothing.
A couple of questions from me. So yeah, I mean, the data one's an interesting one in that we do need, as you said, data to support, you know, what the incidents you guys are seeing at the emergency, you know, where they've happened, what time of day, you know, where the alcohol's come from. Those things are going to be useful at any level moving forward. So support that principle. Secondly, I'm just interested in your thoughts. The potential to remove alcohol bans from Hawea or Arrowtown or whatever. Is there potential that's a self-fulfilling prophecy because we haven't had the problems because the bans are in place, and now we've suggested that there's no evidence that there's a problem? Is removing the ban just going to bring the problem back? Is it self-fulfilling?
It certainly could be. I think that within the council documents, it would still be sufficient evidence if there was evidence. So that presumably there was evidence of harm prior to those alcohol-free zones being implemented. That evidence could still be used to maintain them. It wouldn't be a good argument to use current evidence when there is a ban in place of no harm to lift. So I think that would still be well within the writing of the law that you could still use that historical evidence prior to when the alcohol-free zones were put in place.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks. And welcome, Simon, to the table, and thanks for your patience today. But I'm sure you'll agree that the submissions are useful to give a bit of leeway to, but we certainly value the police's input into this, so we'll welcome, and I'm sure we'll have a good discussion.
My name is Simon Matheson, and I am the Alcohol Harm Reduction Officer in Queenstown. So the police position is that we support the existing bans as they in the hours and locations they're in, but we would advocate for a 24-hour ban within the CBDs of Queenstown and Wanaka. I won't read my submission because it's reasonably lengthy, but in terms of dealing with lack of evidence or lack of offending, part of my submission is around the fact that New Zealand Police has a prevention first approach to how we deal with the public and how we deal with crimes. So we look to get in front of it, to be present and to be in front of people when things are happening. And we look to take every opportunity we have with a member of the public in a positive way. So whether that's in terms of alcohol or someone parking a camper van in the wrong place or looking to do something with family harm, we take every opportunity to prevent harm and to get in front of them. So in terms of how we deal with that with members of the public on the beach is when we find someone on the beach, we'll advise them that there's a liquor ban in place, that's unlawful for them to be doing what they're doing. We then explain the process behind that as to why it's in place, what it's looking to achieve. We then encourage them to either remove themselves or the alcohol, which we are also legally obliged to do before taking any action. And our last step would be enforcement action. And this is the type of approach that was taken through COVID. And we seek to gain greater understanding and compliance with the general public to achieve the liquor bans and to prevent harm. There's a big push and a greater understanding around policing by consent. And part of that is that the general public understand the reasons as to why we're preventing the harm and how what we go about doing prevents that harm. So our everyday approach is really takes that engage, the explain and the encourage before we look to take any enforcement action. And so when we deal with people on the beach or drinking in public places, we're doing this all the time. We simply don't, there are breaches taking place all the time, but we don't record those breaches and we don't record them as an offence, we don't record them as a warning, because if we start doing that, we simply don't get anything else done and we end up counting facts and figures, counting facts and figures, which has a value and an important thing, but then we don't get on to our next task and our next activity. So I'd also like to support the doctor's position in terms of talking about the stress that goes under the hospital. In recent years, the police have changed their position in terms of dealing with intoxicated people, whether that's intoxicated from alcohol or drugs or from whatever means. The police cell is not the best place for a person to be who has a medical issue in terms of their health. So whereas we would house people and we would make our best efforts to look after people, we now place them with the professionals who can monitor their health and provide them everything they need. So our approach has changed in that we will transport persons to the hospital and we will assist the hospital if need be to look after them. But we don't look after people who are intoxicated from alcohol or drugs unless we essentially have to, because we can't provide them the best care and we're not health professionals. We'll move on to, this is the all reported occurrences that happened within the Queenstown scene station where alcohol was a contributing factor. In the last couple of years, we've started to record the contributing factors to offences and occurrences. And the main ones we link, whether it's a hate crime, whether there's alcohol or whether there's mental health. So that's given us the ability in the last few years to have a greater understanding of what's going on. And we only really link alcohol or mental health or whatever factor it is when we have a definitive understanding that that has led to that occurrence. So there will be a greater number of stats, but we're, I wouldn't say conservative, but we only draw that link when we have the definitive ability to. So what this illustration shows is that within the Queenstown area, 37% of all reported occurrences involving alcohol as a contributing factor were in the alcohol ban area as it stands, and condensed within several blocks within that area. I can move on to the next one, please. These are hotspots. This just shows the area which is consistent with the first area where calls for service for police as alcohol is a contributing factor. The codes K1 or K3 indicate that's where police present at something, and our presence alone through management of the situation or the people is enough to resolve the incident. Or a K3 is where there was no actual offence, but where something has gone on and we're again able to resolve it or deal with what's going on without taking any further action. This supports the first graph, and it shows that the offences are condensed around the CBD, and as you can see, some of those areas are starting to expand further away from the CBD.
Yep. I'm happy to have a fairly informal here. So the liquor ban area is a year-round ban, 8 till 8. The it's 24 hours a day for a set period. I'm just trying to inform the you're advocating for a 24-hour year-round ban. I'm just trying to how does this sort of support that case that would make a difference in this? Is there any time data or any?
There is further data as we go on yet. This is just a quick illustration of the crime types. Again, it shows again a clustering around the CBD. It's just supporting the first couple of graphs. Please. This is the day and the hour, and there's a couple of different presentations here. So this is around violence, and it shows that predominantly it peaks later in the evening, early in the morning, and the second half of the week. So as the good doctor did, he did steal a little bit of my thunder, which I'm fine with, is that I would propose that the hours in the centre there, in the middle of the day, are where people are consuming alcohol, whether that's in public places or in other places, but generally in relation to this public place consumption, especially in summer, from 10 to 11 o'clock onwards through the middle of the day into the afternoon, that's what leads to the offending and the behaviours later at night and early in the morning. Typically, we would see people congregate on the beach or congregate in public spaces, and they may be there for 1, 2 to 3 hours before anything happens. We had an example before Christmas of people who were down the waterfront. They went down to the barbecue area to have drinks there, and they were there before the liquor ban commenced. They had a large gathering, family and friends. They were there for several hours, not a problem. Then, as we're heading towards 3 or 4 hours onwards, there was a family harm incident, there was an assault, people were arrested for breach of bail. So I would state, and it will be my position, that the reason we have no offences or anything in the middle is because that is when people are consuming the alcohol, which leads to the behaviours, which leads to the offences and the issues later on.
This issue about 8 to 8, the 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. Obviously, according to that data, the 8 a.m. is fairly arbitrary because the incidents stop at 4 or 5 a.m. If we were to consider moving those times, what is it 6 p.m? Is it 5 p.m? I mean, or in the absence of a 24-hour ban, I'm saying, is there help bringing that forward given the 8 a.m. is arbitrary? Is 6 to 6 better? 5 to 5?
You win and lose on some. I mean, in my submission, there's I was dealing with a couple of foreign tourists at 8 o'clock, at 10 past 8 in the morning, who were sitting on the beach drinking cider, and they were very intoxicated. So, before 8 o'clock, that's unlawful. After 8 o'clock, it's fine. But then it was a summer morning. We're getting people walking on the beach. We're getting families starting to get out and about, and it's now lawful then when it's not lawful before 8. And if it was 6 o'clock, it would still.
You still have that threshold problem.
Yeah. And also, I mentioned, I was coming down to watch the Highlanders game, to view the grounds before the Highlanders game as part of my role to talk about the licensed areas. There was a group of 6 or 7 young guys drinking Woodstock 7% on the green. It's 2:30 in the afternoon. It's lawful for them to drink Woodstock on the green. At that time, there's families, there's adults, people are having food, enjoying the sunshine. 2:30, that's fine. After 8 p.m, that's an issue, but there's no families, there's no kids sitting there having food or doing anything at 8 o'clock. So for me, the times are incongruent and they don't make sense. I think in terms of the consistency that everyone knows that if you're in a CBD, it's not accepted. And if you look across New Zealand and even in our region, Gore, Te Anau, Dunedin, Kago, everyone has a 24-hour ban, and people do express surprise that they can drink at any time anywhere in town. So in terms, sorry, to answer your question, timings for me, some are better, some you're always going to win and lose. Yeah, I think 24 hours is the safest option.
Yep. Have you got more on?
Yeah, this is drugs and disorder, which matches the violence, but is not quite as pronounced. And if we move down, traffic offences. Those traffic offences are difficult because as part of our reporting, we don't record exactly where the alcohol was consumed. So, but that is.
Are these specifically alcohol related traffic events?
Yeah. Alcohol was a contributing factor. Yeah. So whether that is a intoxicated driver or a vehicle accident or something like that. Yes.
It's quite interesting. They start much earlier in the afternoon, don't they?
Yes, that's very surprising. That just shows that throughout the year, which is reasonably consistent with some variation over different years, although it's very difficult to draw any strong conclusions from this, the impact that COVID has had. And that displays our shift patterns and times, just shows that we devote more staff to the times and the windows where more offences are occurring on the street. Liquor infringements, again, sort of matches up with what I was talking about, our approach and prevention first, and that we're not issuing a huge amount of tickets. And that one is the breach liquor ban in Queenstown. That is for the last few years period where we changed the way we recorded our warnings. So we just made it far easier, far more user-friendly at the front end for staff to record the warnings. And that's what we're getting. And as I mentioned earlier, the offences are out there, the breaches are there, but the way we record them is problematic, and therefore we don't capture a great picture of what is happening on the street. And this just moves on to Wanaka. Again, this is the Wanaka area. It shows it's 26% of all occurrences of alcohol as a factor contained within the ban area. That's the hotspots for Wanaka, which are of interest, shows a little bit of a movement out of the liquor ban and into residential streets. That may be due to the movement of people in and out of town through Airbnbs or hotels.
So just jump back to that one. So one of the suggestions was expanding it into Lismore Park or Ely Point in one case. That seems to support including Lismore Park, but not necessarily Ely Point. Would that be correct?
Again, yes, it does. It certainly supports that. But in terms of Ely Point, again, we don't collect the data. We don't record all those warnings.
Yeah.
So, and it may well be that they're locating people in there in cars consuming alcohol, but that's not recorded in the way that we can present to you. Just different crime types. Again, it's not as pronounced as Queenstown, but again, the same clustering within the CBD. And very similar as Queenstown, but not quite as pronounced, although there are some splatterings throughout the day of increased occurrences and violence. Drugs and disorder is much less, but very pronounced in certain windows there. And traffic offences as well.
Super interesting that the traffic offences start at 4 in the afternoon or earlier. So. Anyway.
And the shift patterns are slightly different to Queenstown, but again, attempt to marry and match up as much as the occurrences as possible. It's occurrences. The spike in 2021 shows a change in tactic in Wanaka and how they recorded some items over there. And again, stronger in terms of infringement notices, but very much the same as Queenstown. And the last one again reflects the same as in Queenstown, where there was a strong approach to recording the offences over there. And that's all the slide is. Any questions on any of those?
I'm sure there'll be plenty actually.
Yeah.
Have you got some more?
I've got a little bit more to say.
Would you guys have any questions now, or do you want to wait? No. Carry on. Keep going with your stuff.
So in my submission, I also mentioned the concept of responsible guardians, which I know there has been movement around in terms of getting responsible people within the CBD, whether that's diners or families spending more time in town, that tends to regulate people's behaviours and societal norms. I think a 24-hour liquor ban certainly promotes more family activity, more younger people, more a wider range of people visiting town. We do deal with a lot of people in town who ask us in terms of when fireworks and things like that are on, where do they go, where can they watch it? It's not in the CBD because they don't want to bring kids into the CBD. So I think the more we can move alcohol and that type of activity out of the CBD, we'll get more families and more responsible guardians. The next thing I'd like to refer to was also something referred to by Health in terms of self-fulfilling prophecy. And I worked in Auckland at a time when Mission Bay had a lot of problems in the car parks there. A liquor ban was put in place. There was lots of assaults, there was robberies, there's all kinds of offences, behaviour going on. Liquor ban was put in place. It worked really well, removed the majority of all offences and issues. After the set period, it had to be reviewed. There's no offences. Liquor ban is withdrawn and offending returns. So it's an issue within the legislation, but at some point, I believe the liquor bans are working, and you're not getting offences there because they are working. That would be there, and that for me would be going in with the consistency across New Zealand of people coming in and being extremely surprised that they can consume alcohol. A couple of last points I'll talk about. Some trends that we're seeing within New Zealand is that since COVID, there's been a change in domestic tourism, where Queenstown itself is starting to see a lot more North Island domestic tourists than we ever have in the past. That has been evidence. I think it's a good thing. It's a great thing. New Zealanders are seeing more of their own country. However, what we are getting now is groups of 8 to 10 people fighting on Church Street with their shirts off. This is something we haven't had pre-COVID. It's something you see in New Zealand and certain parts of Australia. Not something we should be able to be proud of, but it is a trend that we see with New Zealand males, and it's something we're starting to see greater now with increased domestic tourism. I believe a lot of these people come from places where they can't consume in town. They're not allowed to drink on the streets or anywhere. They tend to come here, and Queenstown is a party town, has a reputation, but certainly when they're allowed to drink everywhere, the handbrake comes off and behaviour tends to be poor. This is evidenced in the last weekend. We had two groups of young males from Rotorua, both from rival gangs. There was no issues between those two groups with each other. However, one of those groups was involved in assaults and fights in town. And I would propose that alcohol is a main factor in those fights. The licensed premises in town are well maintained and well managed, and they regulate behaviour well. The door staff regulate behaviour well. All the door staff talk to each other. They share images and names and faces of people who've caused problems in that evening. So at certain points, people from outside town cannot get into licensed premises and have issues. Then they're on the street and they're drinking in public spaces. Another thing that we haven't seen in Queenstown, but would be of concern to me is, as I mentioned, I spend a lot of time policing in Auckland. With a cost of living crisis, and this has been happening in Auckland for some time, people would travel to the CBD or to places where there was bars and nighttime venues. They would park their vehicles in car parks or in public spaces, and then they would consume alcohol there. The cost of alcohol within the licensed premises or door charges to get in made it prohibitive. So they would drink in a car park. They would then go to a licensed premises to socialise, to dance, to listen to music, and then they would return back to the car park to drink more alcohol, and they would just repeat this throughout the night. What this led to was large fights, stabbings, there was issues, there was sexual assaults within the car parks and within the streets between the car parks and the bars. You had just people moving back and forwards all the time, drinking alcohol very fast because they wanted to get back to the environment where they could socialise, but then again moving in and out all the time. So not something that we see in Queenstown, but it's a concern that we may see moving forward in terms of just cost of living and the financial. People still want to go out, they will take every opportunity to go out and to do that as cheap as they possibly can.
All right, so yeah, thank you for the excellent presentation. Thanks for the data as well. You know, data is an important piece. Any questions from the panel?
Just one through the chair. Thanks for your presentation. As an extremely early morning worker here in the CBD. It did concern me in the past about the lack that I saw of policing in the early hours of the morning, but that has definitely changed that I've seen in my treks into town Monday to Friday. I actually saw it this morning, passing night and day at about 4:30, flashing lights and a bit of an incident going on. In light of a 24-hour ban, I just want some clarity around the police resource to enforce.
As I mentioned, we're already out there making those interactions. I would say at the moment, if people are driving down the waterfront and they're seeing groups drinking, then and they're well behaved, they're generally not interacting with them because there's little we can do. If that ban was in place, then that would be a stop. And all it is a conversation. We give them the opportunity to remove themselves or the alcohol. And as in my presentation, I think it allows us to get ahead of the issue, to get in front of people. And we want to have positive interactions, not just with good people, but with everyone. We find that if we can have a positive interaction with problematic people or young people at the beginning of the night, as the night progresses, we tend to get a more favourable reaction with them. So we engage with them positive at the beginning. When they come into town, we have field recordings, we say hi, we high five, we do whatever it takes to get some positive interaction. Later on in the night, when they're intoxicated or when they're moving about into questionable behaviours, they will reflect on that positive interaction, and what could turn bad can be a laugh and a joke and can be pushed sideways rather than turning into an incident. So the 24-hour ban just gives us a great opportunity to get in front of people and engage with them.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. There's a lot of data there. Would almost, support the move to ban alcohol completely across the country. But yeah, I guess some of the data where the offences are occurring, it's hard to know from there how much of that alcohol is consumed within the alcohol ban areas, I guess, or the areas that are proposed for that. But yeah, there's some indication in. I did have a question. I think you might have answered it actually, as we went through it. I know, just tying up between the medical side of things and the policing, you mentioned that you have to take someone out to hospital to be looked after if they're incapacitated. So that again is just tying up resources, I guess, as well. Did you say you leave police out there to?
It depends. If we have someone who's really unwell and their behaviour is really poor, then we will take them to the cells and ambulance will come in and manage them that way. But we would prefer to have them out there. So last night, someone was taken out very intoxicated and then left with ED staff. So we stayed there for as long as ED, when ED are comfortable with us leaving them. And we can manage it as best we can, but that does remove resources from, when you're doing that, you don't have a car driving around town, driving around the streets and have been visible.
And the only other question I did have was, you mentioned people coming to town and asking or being surprised that they can drink in public, but how do we compare with other main centres? Do most of them have alcohol ban areas that are applicable 24 hours a day, year round?
I think in my written submission, every major centre has one. I went through, I think I listed maybe 16 to 18 major centres, and a lot of those centres have them in multiple locations. So it'll be a CBD here, it'll be a park over here, it'll be a sporting arena here. They're just international tourists, especially anyone from North America, is incredibly surprised that you can drink in public anywhere at any time. But most New Zealanders are very surprised that they can drink. And the only way they think about drinking is because they see someone else do it. So it's almost in their subconscious, they're not even thinking about it because you can't. And then they see a group doing it, and then they ask us.
Yeah, just one more through the chair. Just on the back of Councillor Bartlett's question there about other parts of New Zealand. You know, Queenstown's this tourist centre known for its party atmosphere. What are those other places have it? You know, I'm not too sure whether you have data from places like Mount Maunganui, the Coromandel, those other generally party-driven sort of places.
I don't have any specific data. Yeah. I know that Tauranga
how we compare
and Mount Maunganui have alcohol bans there. I know that the Mount
24-hour ones, or
yes, yeah. I believe the Mount has has had ongoing issues with behaviour over the New Year period for a long-standing period of time, and they manage it how they can. The similar one would be, I think it's Taupo, and they have a 24-hour ban running from a Thursday through to a Monday. And then they have a reduced window over the rest of the week. Whether that's an option, the council will be interested in. But there are certainly positives with that. The only issue I would see with that is that when we get back up and running pre-COVID, we don't have a weekend. You know, if you come to Queenstown and you're here for 3 days, and that's a Tuesday to a Thursday, that's your Friday, Saturday, Sunday, because you're here. So that's sort of how I operate.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. So is the CBD / hospitality zone the same as the liquor ban zone? Like if we're to institute a 24-hour ban, is it actually just around a tighter hospitality area, or is it actually the same as what we do over the broader ban?
From my point of view, whatever the ban is needs to be easily and clearly identified.
So it's just a consistent one.
Yeah, and if you look at some of those emerging hotspots, it's pushing out into Hamilton Street, into residential streets, and I think that's probably the movement of people in and out of town, and people staying at Airbnbs and staying in hotels later before they come to town. I don't want to put a ban over all of town. I just think it needs to be a clear identification that people, so when they know they're crossing an easily identifiable boundary that they know that they're passed into.
So, which raises the next question, so that I can imagine the question people would ask is, why shouldn't I be allowed to have a wine on the beach sitting with my partner on a blanket, or have a picnic or whatever? So I suppose we've got to find that line between what is appropriate public drinking versus what is inappropriate, or what is going to cause or reduce harm. So I suppose having a look at those maps that you sent, is there a case that you could have a slightly more refined liquor ban area that's 24 hours a day, but get rid of some of those sort of peripheral areas to some degree that haven't got a history of?
Yeah, it could well be that the issue would be the displacement of it. The liquor ban starts here and the fields are out, then people are going to be on the fields.
Yeah.
If I guess if it's a residential street and there's nowhere for people to gather, then that makes it easier to manage. But yes, you certainly could have a combination of the two.
Refinement. One of the discussions I had with Senior Sergeant Brooks earlier around the New Year's stuff was that they treated it as entry points into the zone, so that they were intercepting people at New Year's or whatever coming into that zone and having meaningful entry points, if you like, identifying where that zone started and actually patrolling that gave them a lot of power. There's value in that, obviously, adjusting the boundaries to meet those sort of
so for example,
entry points.
Here for New Year's, there was signboards were around town, which are really good, and we spent a bit of time up on near Queenstown Primary as the people come in, and simply just asking them where they're aware of it. And most people, through social media and through the council and through other forms, were aware of where the liquor bans were. And you have a presence there, and you have rubbish bins there, so that if they're walking and drinking, then they know that they're in. And we generally, when we comes to an event like New Year's, now we push our staff out, so they go walking down towards Fern Hill, they go walking up towards Port Road, and they push several hundred metres down, so they have a visible presence so people know that they're entering. And that's not something obviously you can do 24/7, but with some signage and with the social media coverage which young people look towards now, then I think you can have that effective knowledge without having a footprint on the ground.
I did have one more question, sorry. The maps that we've got for Queenstown extend along Park Street, along the lakefront, but they don't include Jubilee Park. Have you had any incidences of anything happening on Jubilee Park?
No, not really, no.
I guess the only reason I ask is that people see that it's not included in the alcohol-free area. There's potential that they'll go there and it becomes one, but until there's any evidence of that, we can't do much about that.
And people haven't pushed outside the boundaries too much.
Right.
You know, they cover all the gardens, and once people become aware of the gardens, they're not going there, and they could push further down, but they don't. And if you go out towards Sunshine Bay, you're allowed to out there, but people don't. So I think once people come to town and they understand why they're in town and what they can and can't do, then they tend to comply generally.
Very good, thank you.
And talking about the maps again, I mean, is there any comment about the Arrowtown ones, for instance, that sort of seem to be a little bit arbitrary and they extend right through the residential area? Is it sort of?
I would say you could probably compress Arrowtown down like closer to the CBD.
Okay.
If you can call it the CBD, but towards the main street and the licensed premises.
And the park below there and stuff.
Yeah. And
Some similar in Highway potentially that it doesn't necessarily need to be the whole residential area. It can just be the waterfront and the park, the parks around the pub and things.
But in places like Arrowtown and Harwell, I don't think we want to be in a position where we have holidaymakers coming into town who are walking the beer in their hands, and we're in front of them because they're not aware of it. If this is a small, relaxed place, then although we're pleased to that style, I don't think we need to.
It's a tool, not a you don't use it unless you need it, but it's there. Look, I think that's been. Have you got any additional questions? I think that's been super useful, and I think it's given us a different perspective of the evidence as well, the data as well, which is great. So I suppose, have you got anything further you'd like to say? So with that in mind, are there any other submitters that we haven't recorded who have turned up who expected to speak or anything like that? No? Okay. Very good. So what I will do, the panel will now adjourn to deliberate. So we'll take into account the submissions and have a chat to the officers. Actually, I might just invite the officers to come to the table, the council staff to come to the table if there's any additional questions resulting from the submissions, and then so yeah, just have you guys got anything additional that you want to say in reflection of hearing the submissions?
Through Mr. Chair, no, I have nothing to add. In your hands, sort of how you want to proceed from here, where that there's a few different areas to go through.
Discuss,
so if you want me to sort of throw out the headings and recommend or.
I think what we'll do, we'll have just a couple of round questions here, and then we'll adjourn and deliberate without the public. So yeah, thank you. Are there any questions for the council staff?
Just one is a couple of the submitters have mentioned the 24-hour year-round. Then, have you got any comments on that? Based on the preparation of the report.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I guess the overarching comment is here is that it's staff's job to outline the legislative requirements and the evidentiary requirements in this regard, and staff assessment based on what we've been presented with doesn't support this. But it is the panel that is weighing this evidence. You have the information in the staff report from our end. Okay. Do you have anything to add on that, John?
I think there's a balance that could be met. And Simon's provided some of those examples with Taupo, for example, having 24 hours over a weekend period, that kind of thing. However, as he's also mentioned, pre-COVID, we don't necessarily have a weekend. So I think there could be something in between a permanent 24-hour ban and not.
Just for the chair, I just want to make a comment really. You know, as being a long time resident, that you know, seen this place change. Most people in this room have seen it change. I think I've sat on one of these before, haven't I, Shah? Yes. So I've been through this process before, and I'd just like to express my thanks at the quality of the submissions. What we've heard here this morning, very interesting 5 minutes with Simon from the police.
Yeah, 5 minutes.
So, you know, there's a lot there for us that we're going to have to take seriously, and, you know, I look forward to deliberations. Thank you for the submitters and thank you to staff.
And yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks to everyone for being, and thanks for your patience, because we can, you know, be very rigid, hold ourselves to 5 minutes, but I think the discussion was really useful. So, and everyone got their chance. So, I think that was appropriate. What I'll do is we'll move that we adjourn the hearing now, and that the panel will yeah, take some time to deliberate and make a recommendation to council. So thanks everyone for their involvement. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Thank you, ladies.
I'm sorry, can I have a second?
Oh.
I've adjourned, can I have a second?
Yes.
Yep. And all those in favour, thank you.